Dad, the Dubai trip is cancelled. Derek's company is in trouble. We just can't go. My daughter Natalie said it with a trembling voice and eyes swollen as if she'd been crying. I believed her. I felt sorry for her. I even said, "If you need help, just tell me." But 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a notification from Chase Bank. Pending charge, $20,000. Atlantis, the Royal Dubai. I stared at the screen for a long time. And in that quiet moment, I understood her lie wasn't just a betrayal. It was the first crack in the bridge I'd spent my whole life building. A month later, when that financial trouble turned into a $500,000 crisis, she came back on her knees, begging me for help. I said nothing. I just handed her a single piece of paper, and when she reached the third line, she fainted right where she stood. Before I tell you what was written on that paper, and how my late wife had built a perfect trap that our daughter walked straight into, tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you believe that once trust is broken, it's never truly whole again. My name is Thomas Beckett. I'm 74 years old, a retired structural engineer living alone in Austin, Texas. For 50 years, I built bridges. I understood tension load paths and the hidden fractures that bring structures down. And I know better than anyone, anything built on a lie will eventually collapse. The morning Natalie called, I was making coffee. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, glinting off an old blueprint of the Miller Creek Bridge I designed years ago. She talked about Derek's financial trouble, her voice fragile, perfectly measured to make me worry. I didn't question her. I didn't doubt. That was my mistake. 3 days later, when that bank alert appeared, my hand trembled. $20,000 wasn't a small amount, and it wasn't an accident. Atlantis. The Royal, one of the most expensive hotels in Dubai. I sank into my chair, the wood cold against my back, and stared at the phone. The house was silent. Only the clock ticked a slow metallic sound like steel straining under pressure. I thought about everything. About Eleanor, my wife, who once told me there would come a day when I'd need to use an engineer's logic to protect what she left behind. I laughed, then said she was overthinking. Now I realized her words were blueprints sealed until the moment they were needed. Natalie didn't answer my calls that evening. My messages showed read, but no reply. I sat in my study staring at an old family photo taken at the Grand Canyon. Natalie, at 12, standing between her mother and me, smiling wide under that perfect Arizona sun. The light back then was warm and pure. Tonight, Austin's sky felt colder than concrete. I couldn't sleep. Being lied to doesn't pierce like pain. It resonates like a quiet vibration echoing through bone until you can't tell if it's outside or inside you. I wrote in my notebook the date, the hour, the amount, and the hotel's name. My handwriting shook not from age, but from clarity, because from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I drove downtown to the Chase branch. The clerk smiled politely and asked why I needed the inquiry. "I'd like to confirm a $20,000 transaction in Dubai," I said. She typed, then turned her screen toward me. There it is. Reservation confirmed. The booking name is Natalie Harris. I thanked her, signed the form, and stepped outside. Texas sunlight was blazing, but I felt cold. On the printed slip, the words "Executive Suite, 5 nights, paid in full" glared back at me like a confession carved in stone. I folded the paper, slipped it into my jacket, and walked along the sidewalk. Cars roared by their echoes, sharp and hollow, like wind whistling through loose beams of a half-broken bridge. That night, I opened the old safe in my study. Inside, between folders and tax files, lay a cream envelope. On the front, written in Eleanor's hand, "Thomas open only when she makes you doubt." I hadn't touched it for a year. Until now. Inside were 3 sheets of paper and a business card. Laura Campos, estate attorney. She was the one who helped Eleanor and me establish the Beckett family trust after we sold Beckett Structural. Below the first page, Eleanor had written one short line, "If that day comes, call Laura. Everything is already in place." I read it again and again. My heartbeat steady, deliberate. Eleanor never acted without foresight. Whatever she set up, it was a mechanism, a structural safeguard. And now it was time to activate it. That night, under the yellow light of my desk lamp, I pulled out my old engineer's notebook. I drew a diagram, not of steel or stone, but of people. At the center, I wrote one word, trust. From it, I drew lines to 4 others: family money, legacy responsibility. Beside each, I wrote a single question: which one cracked first? Outside rain began to fall. Each drop struck the tin roof with a sound like metal meeting metal. I rose, opened the window. Cold air drifted in, the smell of wet earth mixed with the faint scent of oak. And in the rhythm of that rain, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice whispering, "Thomas, don't let the bridge fall because of a false weld." I opened my eyes and stared into the dark. I knew what I had to do in the morning. I would call Laura Campos. I would open the trust records. And if necessary, I would dismantle the bridge I built piece by piece to keep the foundation from rotting away. The coffee cup was still on the table, cold now, leaving a brown ring on the wood. I didn't wipe it off. I left it there, a reminder that some stains once set can never be fully erased. That night I sat alone in my study. The desk lamp threw a cone of light across the wooden surface, glinting off the glass frame of my wedding photo with Eleanor. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't open a book, didn't play music. The silence in the house had its own gravity, dense, heavy, the kind that presses against your chest until even breathing feels like work. I opened my laptop, an old reflex I never outgrew. Maybe I was looking for distraction, or maybe for order something familiar. The browser blinked awake. For a moment, I almost searched for material costs on a bridge design I'd shelved years ago, but my fingers moved on their own, typing a name I'd been avoiding for days. Natalie Harris. Her Instagram page loaded. The first image froze me where I sat. A shimmering infinity pool, blue water, stretching into the horizon, glass towers catching the last fire of the sunset. In the center of the frame stood my daughter, wearing a white dress, a champagne flute in hand, smiling. The caption read, "Finally, a break we deserve." I stopped breathing. My hand still rested on the mouse, but my fingers had gone rigid, suspended halfway in air. I scrolled. The next photo, Derek's shirt unbuttoned, his arm draped around her shoulders. Then little Lily, my granddaughter, building a sandcastle under the pale gold light of the Dubai sky. The beach, the horizon, the color of the water. No doubt. Not old pictures, all posted 3 days ago. I clicked to zoom in. In the curved reflection of Natalie's glass, Derek's phone was visible, capturing the scene. A perfect accidental confession. No denial possible. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. What came instead was emptiness. Anger burns fast. Disappointment seeps in slow. It's rust, not fire. It doesn't scream, it corrodes. 50 years as an engineer taught me one rule when a beam starts to crack. You don't strike it, you observe it. Find where the fracture began, how far it spread, and whether it can still be saved. I looked at the photos again, then saved them all. I printed each one. The paper slid out warm, the ink still wet, the scent of fresh toner mingling with the stale coffee beside me. Under the lamplight, Natalie's smile glowed from the glossy surface. It was the same smile she wore as a child by the lake in Colorado. But back then, it was innocent. Now, it was practiced. I opened the drawer and pulled out the Beckett Family Trust folder. Eleanor and I had created it after selling Beckett Structural in 2014, $5 million, divided evenly between Natalie and the charitable foundation Eleanor wanted for engineering scholarships. Back then, she had insisted on adding a special clause, the loss of confidence clause. If one day she told me our daughter betrays the family's values or commits any act of financial deceit, you'll have the right to freeze her inheritance immediately. I'd laughed, told her she was too harsh. She just smiled. Thomas, you of all people should know no structure survives if its foundation isn't honest. Now those words echoed like hammer blows. I attached the screenshots and bank records, then drafted an email to Julia Coleman, our family attorney since the trust's inception. Within an hour, she called back. Her voice was low, calm, the tone of someone who's seen too many fractures to be surprised anymore. I understand, Thomas, she said. Eleanor anticipated this possibility. The loss of confidence. Clause gives you full authority to freeze Natalie's access as long as there's evidence of deceit or misuse. I sat still listening to the clock tick behind me. Julia continued, If you choose to proceed, I'll file the petition within 48 hours. Every account linked to the Beckett Trust will be locked. Are you certain you want to do this? I looked toward the photograph on my desk. Eleanor's smile glimmered behind the reflection of the lamplight, her eyes almost alive again. I could hear her voice, calm, steady, certain. If the foundation cracks, you can't paint over it. You have to reinforce it, even if it means tearing part of it down. My throat tightened. It's time, I said. Let's test the load-bearing capacity of this bridge. Silence. Then Julia exhaled softly. I'll have the papers ready. Come to my office in the morning. We'll start the process. I thanked her and hung up. The house fell quiet again. I walked to the window. Outside the street glistened under the faint orange of the streetlights. A light rain had just passed, leaving the air cold and clean, the scent of wet earth rising from the pavement. I lit a cigarette, a habit Eleanor used to despise, and watched the smoke drift through the light. In the haze, I imagined a bridge, long, elegant, suspended over dark water. At its center, a thin fracture spread like a hairline crack across glass. If left alone, it would bring the entire structure down. And maybe I thought that's exactly what was happening to my family. I turned back to the desk, slid the printed photos into an envelope along with the transaction slip, and wrote on the front, Evidence number 1, Dubai, then placed it in the drawer. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos again. The pool, the glass, the smiles, and heard Eleanor's voice, faint but unmistakable whispering from somewhere behind me. Thomas, you know what to do. You just have to be brave enough to do it. At 3:17 a.m., I opened my eyes, stood up, and stepped outside to the porch. The wind moved through the oak trees, whispering like distant machinery. Above me, the Austin sky hung heavy and gray. I thought of the morning ahead, the drive to Julia's office, the pen waiting on her desk, the signature that would freeze the trust I once built for my daughter. I knew my hand wouldn't shake. The engineer in me was fully awake now, and he knew the truth. Sometimes to save the structure, you first have to tear down the part that's already broken. The next morning I left the house while the mist was still hanging low over the road. Downtown Austin was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world hasn't quite woken up yet. A few delivery trucks moved through the pale gold of the streetlights. I drove slowly, each mile heavier than the last. On the seat beside me lay an envelope, the photos, the bank statements. Its corner had bent slightly from how tightly I'd been holding it. I knew that once I handed it to Julia, there'd be no turning back. Julia Coleman's office sat inside an old brick building near the Colorado River. When I walked in, she was already waiting. The morning light caught her black-rimmed glasses, and for a moment the reflection hid her eyes. But when she looked up, they were calm, clear, and human in a way I needed them to be. "Mr. Beckett," she said softly. Eleanor anticipated this. I reviewed the original Beckett family trust. She didn't just create a safeguard for the assets, she left you a separate set of instructions, a sealed section. My heartbeat slowed. Instructions. Julia nodded, opening her drawer and pulling out an envelope yellowed at the edges. She gave this to me in 2015, told me to hand it over only if there was evidence of Natalie's financial deceit. I took it. My hand trembling slightly. The handwriting on the front hit me like a blow, Eleanor's looping steady script. If she forgets her integrity, let the law remind her. No one has the right to use my legacy to buy imitation. I looked up at Julia. I thought this was just her being cautious. She gave a faint, sad smile. Eleanor understood people better than we did Thomas. She always said legacy isn't money, it's a test of character. And she believed that if this day came, you'd know what to do. I didn't answer. I just nodded, thanked her, and signed the documents that activated the loss of confidence clause. When I was done, Julia rose and studied me with quiet gravity. As of today, the Beckett family trust is frozen. No one, including Natalie, can touch a cent. But there's one more thing. She crossed the room, opened a filing cabinet, and pulled out a leather-bound book wrapped in protective paper. This is a duplicate of the journal Eleanor wanted you to have. She said if the clause was ever triggered, it would help you remember why you built all of this in the first place. I took it in both hands. The leather was soft-worn and smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. When I opened it, the first line was written in her signature blue ink, smooth, and even as ever, integrity is the load-bearing beam of every structure. I sat there, turning the pages slowly. Between financial notes and lists of charities, she had copied down quotes she'd collected over the years. One stopped me cold: a bridge never collapses because of the storm, but because someone forgot to check the joints. I closed my eyes and heard her voice again. When she was alive, Eleanor always believed in testing everything under stress. Bridges, houses, people. You never know what will hold until it's put under weight. On the way home, I stopped at Green Hill Cemetery, where Eleanor rested beneath the oaks. The sunlight had softened, brushing through the branches, scattering gold across the grass. I knelt, placed the journal on the stone, and whispered, "You were right, Elle. Maybe it's time to test the load." The wind moved through the trees, bending the small metal frame on her grave, so it chimed faintly, almost like a reply. I looked up at the sky, bright and endless, and watched her name catch the light, Eleanor Beckett, etched deeper by the sun itself. I stayed there for a long time, thinking about everything that had led here. Back in 2015, when Eleanor had first proposed the trust, I fought her. I told her we shouldn't govern our daughter through legal papers. Eleanor just shook her head and said, "We're not controlling her, Thomas. We're protecting her from the temptations that could destroy her." Now I understood. She hadn't built the trust to preserve money. She built it to preserve conscience. I opened the journal again and turned to the last page. There, in the faintest handwriting, was one final note, almost a message to me alone. "If you're reading this, the bridge has cracked. Don't panic. Just inspect every beam. Some will still be sound. Rebuild from there." I smiled a dry, tired smile that felt more like surrender than peace. Maybe Eleanor never truly left. Maybe she just stepped back so I could learn how to stand in the wreckage without shaking. By afternoon, I left the cemetery with the journal and sealed envelope tucked under my arm. On the drive home, the radio played one of Eleanor's old favorites, a song we used to listen to on rainy nights. The sun slanted across the road, and the air smelled faintly of dust and pine. I drove slowly, letting the silence between verses fill the car. When I reached the house, the scent of aged wood greeted me like an old companion. I placed the journal on my desk beside the printed photos from Dubai. Old habits took over. I adjusted the corner of a picture frame with my measuring tape until it sat perfectly square. The room was still, except for the faint clink of glass as the wind brushed the window pane. I looked down at the cover of the journal once more. "Integrity is the load-bearing beam of every structure." I whispered the words, almost like a prayer. In that silence, I understood. The inspection had begun. And I, a man who had once built bridges across the deepest rivers, was about to test the foundation of his own family. I made a simple dinner that Saturday night. Medium-rare steak, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic, and a small apple pie from the bakery Eleanor used to love on South Congress. On the table sat the old silver cutlery she favored, handles tarnished but still heavy and steady in the hand. I lit 2 low ivory candles. The scent of wax mingled with butter and heat. For the first time in a long while, the house felt like it was breathing again. The doorbell rang softly, then stopped. I opened the door. Natalie stood on the porch in a beige coat, her hair tied up neatly, eyes tanned and bright, as if fresh from the coast. Derek stood beside her, holding a bottle of Cabernet and a small bouquet wrapped in brown paper. They smiled together, polite, measured the kind of smile people practice for wedding photos. I invited them in. Natalie said the kitchen smelled wonderful. Derek held up the bottle, asked if he could open it. I nodded. The cork popped with a dry, deliberate sound. Wine spilled into 3 glasses, thin lines of deep red. I poured myself water first, a small ritual I'd learned for staying in control when emotion tried to push through the cracks. We sat. Derek talked about Austin's growth, a new logistics project, along I-35 investors, circling like hawks. Natalie spoke of the kids, how Emma had learned to ride a bike, how Noah couldn't stop talking about trains. Every word was polished, every pause rehearsed. Dinner moved forward like a presentation that had been practiced to perfection. I cut into my steak, the knife tapping softly against porcelain. When I set it down, I asked quietly, "How was Dubai?" The air changed instantly. Natalie lifted her glass but didn't drink. Derek leaned back, smiling just a little too wide. He said the trip had been work meetings with major partners, not a vacation. They said the infinity pool photo was just a quick shot between site visits, that everything had been last minute, and they hadn't even wanted to leave the kids. I nodded, said I understood. At my age, I'd learned that a lie eventually reveals itself by the way its pieces fail to fit. You don't challenge it. You just let it talk, until the sound of it stops matching the shape of truth. Derek shifted the conversation. Asked about my health. Mentioned Eleanor's apple pie, said nothing. In Travis County ever tasted quite like hers. Natalie smiled and said my sauce was rich, balanced. I told her the recipe was still in my old notebook that I'd printed out for her next time. My eyes wandered toward the photo of Eleanor on the shelf. The candlelight streaked across the glass like a hairline crack in steel. We had pie. Derek asked for another slice, said work had been tightening like a wire lately. Natalie looked at me and said she hoped things would ease soon. I nodded again. Wished them health. Outside, the wind brushed through the oaks. The glass door trembled. Dinner ended on cue, the final act of a short play. Derek rolled up his sleeves, offered to wash dishes. I told him to leave it. Natalie gathered the utensils, moving slowly as if dragging out the warmth. Before leaving, Derek handed me the half-empty bottle, said I should finish it later. Natalie hugged me light, paper-thin, smelling faintly of ocean perfume. They said they'd call during the week. I said sure. The door closed. The sound of their car faded down the drive. The kitchen fell back to its original state, silent butter cooling in the air. I stood for a long while, one hand resting on Eleanor's empty chair. The clock in the living room ticked steady metallic. On the table, 3 glasses caught the candlelight, thin red streaks glinting like fractures across porcelain. I gathered the dishes, stacked them neatly in the sink, ran warm water, then stopped. Dried my hands. Went to the study. That room had once held blueprints and load calculations. Now it held the evidence of another kind of structure. I opened my laptop. The folder was ready screenshots from Instagram and Facebook, the chase statement glowing on the screen, that single line pounding like a hammer on tired steel. Pending charge. $20,000. Atlantis. The Royal Dubai. I dragged each file into a draft email, renaming them systematically, matching every timestamp to each excuse they'd given over dinner. Infinity pool. Champagne glass. Caption. Finally, a break we deserve. The 4th photo showed Emma running in the sand. I zoomed in. Sunlight hit her small arm knees, dusted with sand, her smile wide, unguarded. I stayed on that image longer than the rest. Back in the draft, I typed Julia Coleman's name into the recipient line. The message was short, clinical, clear. These materials constitute evidence of financial misrepresentation connected to the family trust. Request activation of the loss of confidence clause, per Eleanor Beckett's stipulation. I attached the files. Pressed send. The sound, a single soft ping, was sharper than it should have been. I stood, poured a glass of water, drank slowly. Within 10 minutes, my phone buzzed. Julia's reply appeared on the screen. She wrote that the documents were sufficient to qualify as a breach of ethical conduct under the trust's language. If I agreed, she would file a petition for temporary injunction within 24 hours, freezing all distributions until review. She also asked whether I wanted to audit the past 2 years of withdrawals. I read it twice. Every sentence was precise. Nothing wasted. I looked at Eleanor's photo. The candlelight stretched across the glass like a weld line holding 2 metal plates together. I whispered to her that I understood. Then I typed my response, proceed immediately. Include the 2-year audit. After hitting send, I switched off the desk lamp, leaving the candles flickering in the living room. The house glowed in a soft, amber haze. I stepped onto the porch. November air moved cool and damp, carrying pine and river scent. In the distance, a car passed, then faded, just another memory refusing to stay. I thought about the dinner just hours earlier, the polished smiles, the seamless topic shifts, the way Derek's tone tightened when I said Dubai, the way Natalie stared at her shoes instead of my face. I wondered when exactly my daughter learned to build such a perfect shell between herself and the truth. Maybe it started with a small lie, like the first hidden crack beneath a smooth slab of concrete. I went back inside, blew out the candles. A thin wisp of smoke rose, curled, then vanished. The room darkened, lit only by the glow from the street. In that faint light, Eleanor's photo shimmered on the shelf. I could almost see her standing by the doorway, arms crossed, that gentle furrow in her brow. She'd get whenever I told her about a flawed bridge design. She would ask the same question as always. What's the design load? And I'd answer not aloud, but in thought. This isn't steel and concrete anymore. This is the weight of truth pressing down on a home. I opened the window. The curtains billowed softly, city lights outside glinting like rivets along a bridge's spine. In my head, I ran through the steps Julia and I had agreed on: notification to the bank, filing to the court, briefing the trustee, audit schedule. Everything mapped like a night construction plan, each arrow a silent crew moving under floodlight. The phone vibrated again. Julia's follow-up. She always referred to Eleanor as Mrs. Beckett, even now as if she were still somewhere overseeing the process. Julia wrote that the documents would be ready for my signature in the morning and reminded me to maintain complete silence toward Natalie and Derek until the freeze was confirmed. Any premature move could trigger them to shift assets. I replied that I understood. Set the phone face down. Emma's smile flashed in my mind again. That child was innocent. The fault belonged to the adults who chose shortcuts. I opened the drawer, placed Eleanor's leather notebook on top of the paperwork. The first page still read in her steady hand, "Integrity is the load-bearing beam of every structure." I traced the faded ink with my fingertip. Night deepened. Somewhere in the city, Natalie was probably removing her makeup. Derek checking a cash flow chart. Everything moving as if dinner had been nothing but a pleasant evening. But here inside this quiet, wooden house, a command had been sent, and the machinery was beginning to turn. I sat upright, hands still breathing even, and in my head I spoke to Eleanor as I always did when a decision was too heavy to share. Maybe it's time to remove the corroded beam, I told her. Maybe tomorrow I'll sign. And if this bridge can stand again, it will stand on something real. Outside, the wind shifted. The oaks brushed against each other with a sound like waves against pilings. I closed my eyes and let my breath fall into rhythm. No anger now, no hesitation. Only the work. And in the morning, the work would begin. Morning broke, with the sound of a garbage truck grinding down the street and the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the house. I signed the stack of documents Julia had sent overnight, printed 2 copies, and placed them neatly in my briefcase. Every step followed the rhythm I'd set for myself. By noon, the phone buzzed against the wooden table. Natalie's name lit up on the screen. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was cracked and swollen as if she'd already cried herself dry. "Dad, we're in serious trouble. Derek's company, he needs $500,000. It's just a bridge loan, 1 month tops. If we don't get it, we lose everything." I looked out at the yard. Texas sunlight spilled across the concrete steps, shadows of the oak trees shifting slightly. I spoke slowly, measuring each word. You just spent $20,000 on a vacation. Now you're asking for $500,000 to save your husband's company. You call that a bridge? No, sweetheart. That's a drop into a pit. There was silence, then the faint sound of her breath breaking apart. I know, she whispered. I know I was wrong. I thought Derek had everything under control. I just wanted the family to have one good trip before things got bad. Please, Dad, help us through this month. I'll sell the car, I'll sell my things, I'll pay you back every cent. I walked to the window. The curtain shifted gently in the air conditioning. Who guarantees this will be different in a month? What's the interest rate? Who's the lender, the bank, or some private fund? What's the collateral? She inhaled sharply, voice trembling. Part of it's from a private group Derek's broker found. They move fast. The rate's high, but it's short-term, just 30 days. The rest's being negotiated with a small bank in Waco. Collateral's equipment and future contracts. Future contracts, I repeated, meaning nothing signed yet. Silence. Then faintly Derek's voice in the background, muffled and tense. Natalie came back. Derek says if you'd just co-sign the guarantee, Dad, they'll release the funds right away. I closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw the cross-section of a corroded beam still holding but one good load away from snapping. I won't sign anything, I said. And I won't transfer a cent. What you're facing isn't a liquidity problem. It's a truth problem. She broke down completely then. Dad, please, just this once. If we don't make it, the bank will freeze our accounts. The private lenders are threatening to collect this week. Emma and Noah, they're just kids. Derek can't sleep. I don't know how to tell them we might lose the house. I let her cry through the speaker, then said quietly, Go read your mother's will. She wrote about this day. As for me, there's only one thing left for me to do. There was nothing on the line after that but air. A truck roared somewhere down the street. A dog barked once and went quiet. I said goodbye and hung up. For a long time, I stood in the living room. Eleanor's photograph on the shelf seemed to look straight at me, waiting for an answer I'd already given. I took my coat, placed the file into its folder, locked the door, and drove downtown. The Austin sky was a calm, indifferent blue. People strolled by the river. Food trucks along Riverside were already playing music. It all looked so ordinary, it felt almost cruel. Julia's office sat on the 11th floor of a glass tower on Congress Avenue. The receptionist buzzed me in. Julia emerged, white shirt, crisp hair tied back, holding a thicker folder than the one I carried. She pointed toward a small conference room, dark wood table, high-backed chairs, a window framing the red brick steeple of a nearby church. I sat. Julia said she'd received my morning signature and needed my in-person confirmation on 3 forms. 1 petition to the Travis County Court to invoke the loss of confidence clause. 2. Request for a temporary freeze of all trust distributions pending review. 3. Proposal to dissolve the existing family trust and reconstitute its assets into a new entity under the charter she and Eleanor had drafted years ago. I asked how long it would take. She said the filings would be submitted tomorrow morning. We could expect stamped acknowledgement by late afternoon. If the documentation was clean and no emergency hearing was requested, a temporary injunction could be granted within a week. Then a full review. I signed each page. The black ink spread cleanly. The paper rasped faintly against the wood grain. When I finished the last one, Julia slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a printed copy of the new foundation's charter. The name read, the Eleanor Beckett Legacy Foundation. I scanned the Objective Senior Care Center's meal programs, legal aid for victims of elder fraud. Plain words, tight and solid like bolts set in steel. My phone lit up. Natalie. I looked at Julia. She nodded, telling me I could take it. I answered. Set it on speaker. Her voice was wild, Dad, they're here. A man named Briggs. He says he represents investors. They're demanding a $100,000 deposit today, or they'll walk. Derek's talking to them right now. Can you come? No, I said. Tell your husband to send me the contract. If they're real investors, they'll let a lawyer review it. If they're not, they'll disappear. Dad, please, just your signature, 30 days, that's all. 30 days to stretch a hollow shell, I cut in. Tell them every withdrawal from the family trust is now under court review. And tell Derek not to lecture me about bridges when he's standing at the edge of a cliff. Silence again. Then her breathing ragged, fading, and the line went dead. Across the table, Julia kept her eyes on the paperwork. We're on schedule, she said. Stay silent for the next 5 days. Let calls go to voicemail. Everything must go through documentation. Any verbal promise could weaken your position. I thanked her and stood. At the door, I turned back, asked the question that had followed me through too many sleepless nights. What if the court tells me to give her another chance? Julia exhaled, steady. They might suggest mediation, but if the evidence shows clear material deceit and the clause is properly executed, the court will honor Eleanor's intent. She looked straight at me. Your decision is both lawful and justified. That afternoon I drove along the river. The water rippled faintly, paddle boarders gliding past, laughter echoing, then vanishing. I parked and sat there watching the flat surface of the water. In my head, the whole process lined up like a structural drawing freeze order, dissolution transfer of assets, each phase with its own load path and point of stress. That night I reheated a bowl of soup, sat at my desk, and opened Eleanor's leather notebook. The page with her handwriting was frayed at the edge. Integrity is the load-bearing beam of every structure. I laid my palm over it. A quiet steadiness spread through my hand like the moment a drill hits solid rock. Near 9, Julia texted the filing appointment was confirmed for early morning at the Travis County Courthouse. I replied that I'd come with her. She reminded me to bring photo ID and a certified copy of Eleanor's will, just in case the clerk wanted cross-verification. Night settled in. I walked through the house, turning off lights, leaving only the floor lamp in the corner of the living room. Its golden glow softened the air, just like when Eleanor used to sit there reading. I said to her in my head quietly, "It's time." The next morning, the city was still wrapped in haze. I buttoned a dark blue shirt, tied my old but polished shoes. The courthouse wasn't far. The brick facade rose against the pale sky, the Texas flag swaying lazily in the breeze. Julia arrived right on time, carrying 2 thick files. Her steps were quick, firm. We passed through security, surrendered our phones, took our number, and waited on the wooden benches. When called, Julia presented the documents to the clerk. The man skimmed through, adjusted his glasses, stamped each packet, and directed us to another window to pay the filing fee. Each thud of the red seal sounded like a bolt tightening on a bridge joint. When we stepped outside, the sun was high. On the courthouse steps, I paused. This wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was maintenance, a necessary act when the material has failed. I looked down at my hands, the veins showing beneath the skin. I thought of every bridge that had survived the storms, not because it was beautiful, but because its foundation refused to lie about the strength of its bricks. By evening, Natalie hadn't called back, but I knew they'd heard. The bank would have flagged the accounts, the familiar withdrawal paths blocked. Every reflexive click now met with a denial notice. Night came soft. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the wind carrying the river's scent. In that calm dark, I spoke quietly to myself. Sometimes to save the foundation, you have to take down the structure. The oaks whispered overhead, old wood shifting as the wind changed. I placed my hand on the cold tabletop, felt the pulse in my wrist steady, calm. Then, I closed the door behind me, leaving the quiet outside to thicken like water. When I opened my eyes that morning, the first sound was the garbage truck out on the street. The second was the phone vibrating on the nightstand. An email from the court clerk with a single attachment. The subject line read clearly, "Order of dissolution, signed and entered." I sat up, switched on the desk lamp, and opened the file. The embossed seal of Travis County shone faintly on the margin, the judge's signature, cutting a clean, angled line across the bottom. The core sentence, precise, heavy, sat in the middle of the page like a main beam set perfectly on its axis. All remaining assets within the Beckett Family Trust are hereby transferred to the Eleanor Beckett Foundation for Financial Integrity, effective immediately. I printed 3 copies, checked every account number, every signature. Julia texted soon after she'd spoken with the custodian bank. The security sub-accounts would be liquidated in stages and moved into the foundation's endowment. She told me to prepare a summary for our partner organizations, outlining the new allocation goals. I replied that I already had a draft, just needed to update the date. By late morning, the clouds had pulled apart. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching the dust in the air like powdered stone in a workshop. I placed Eleanor's photo beside the stack of files. The name of the foundation printed on paper gave the room a strange new weight. It wasn't about the money changing hands. It was about purpose taking form. The foundation would cover legal fees for elderly victims of financial fraud, fund weekend finance classes at church basements, and pay for meal deliveries when storms made it unsafe to drive. Small, quiet expenditures, but the kind that kept the structure of a community from rotting underneath. By afternoon, the doorbell rang twice, short, urgent. When I opened it, Natalie stood there. Her coat was soaked from rain, eyes swollen, clutching a small handbag like a life buoy. She tried to speak, but only managed 2 words over and over. "Please, Dad." I stepped aside. She walked in, stopping in the living room when she saw her mother's photo. Her shoulders dropped. She lowered her head like someone facing a verdict. I went to the kitchen, fetched a dry towel, set the kettle on, then returned and sat across from her. Natalie began to talk. Derek was being sued. Investors were calling hourly, the lenders wanted repayment, and without $500,000 the house would be seized. She said the bank had flagged their file. Every door was shut. She promised she'd pay me back, sign anything I wanted, do whatever it took to keep a roof over Emma and Noah. Her voice shook like someone running downhill and trying not to fall. I slid a document across the table and turned it so she could see the first page. The court order gleamed under the lamp. I told her she didn't need to worry about the assets anymore because they weren't hers. She reached out, fingertips brushing the paper. Her eyes caught the bold line at the top. The Eleanor Beckett Foundation for Financial Integrity. Her expression faltered like the ground had dropped beneath her. She whispered her mother's name, each syllable heavy as lead. She asked what it meant. I told her the court had approved the loss of confidence clause under the will. The family trust had been dissolved. All assets now belonged to the foundation Eleanor had designed. From the moment the order was signed, every personal distribution ended. Any withdrawal request under her name was void. I didn't raise my voice. I just kept my words straight, aligned, level, unbent. Natalie sank back against the chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I lied. I betrayed you. If I could go back, I'd cancel the trip. I'd make Derek tell the truth. I'd stop pretending. I let her speak. Let the room absorb every sound. Then I said quietly, "No mistake comes free." "You just paid $5 million for your first lesson." She broke down, again, shoulders trembling. I poured tea and set the cup in front of her, the steam curling upward like breath in cold air. She asked if there was another way. "Some bridges can be reinforced," I said, "but some were built on the wrong foundation. Pouring more concrete only makes them heavier and collapse faster. Your problem isn't money, Natalie. Your problem is that you let deception become the ground beneath your feet." Her phone buzzed on the table. She ignored it. A minute later, she said Derek was home. "Two men waiting outside in a car said they were investors. If they didn't get paid by tonight, they'd act on the contract. She asked what would happen to the kids if the house was taken. I told her the court had protections for minors, but children's fear doesn't live on paper. It lives in hurried packing boxes, in whispers at night, in pictures pulled off the wall." Natalie looked up, tears still in her eyes, but her gaze steady. "If I want to fix this," she asked, "where do I start?" "Start with the truth," I said. "A full sentence. No sugar, no shortcuts." She nodded just once, but it was different this time, like someone standing straight for the first time in a long wind. I explained the rest. The order was in effect. The bank was transferring assets into the endowment. She'd receive copies of filings for transparency, but she had no right to draw funds. The new foundation would announce its programs soon. If she wanted to understand how her mother's money would be used, she could come to the office and see for herself. That was all. She whispered, "Did Mom really want this?" I looked at Eleanor's photo. It was from the bridge dedication in Fredericksburg. Her coat lifted by the wind like a sail. "Your mother saw this coming," I said, with a heart that hurt but a clear head. "She loved you. And because she loved you, she had to draw a line. That's how she kept the structure from cracking." Outside, the rain had stopped. Afternoon light stretched long across the floor. Natalie held the order, reading it again, as if verifying her own fall. When she reached the line naming the foundation, her lips moved silently, mouthing a goodbye. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text, interest penalties, new deadlines, acronyms from a loan I didn't have to see to understand. She looked at me as if waiting for a miracle. "I don't do miracles," I told her. "I do blueprints. And in my blueprints, saving a structure never means adding more load to an empty frame." She drew in a long breath, then nodded. "I'll talk to Derek," she said. "I'll sell the car. The furniture if I have to. I'll get a job. I'll call a lawyer, see if there's a way to settle the debt. I'll tell the kids what happened, at least what they can understand. That we made mistakes, that we'll face them. The words didn't promise redemption, but the tone was different, like metal, after it's been ground smooth edges gone still cold, but true." I walked her to the door. The air smelled of wet earth. The oak tree in the yard shook off water leaves falling across the path. At the steps, she turned back. "Dad, do you think one day I could do something for Mom's foundation?" "If you mean it," I said, "come Monday morning. Bring a notebook and a pen. Your first task will be reviewing aid applications from East Austin seniors. Verify every document, make the calls, leave nothing unchecked. Do that for 3 months. Then we'll talk about the next step." She nodded again, then headed toward her old sedan. She sat for a while before starting the engine, as if gathering balance. The car rolled down the street and disappeared at the bend where the evening light was lowering. I stayed on the porch, listening to distant city traffic. Someone's laughter carried faintly on the wind. Inside the living room, light had come on. The yellow glow spread across the table like a layer of warm varnish. I gathered the remaining court documents, clipped them with the bank's letters, and placed them neatly in the drawer. The click of the lock sounded final clean. Then I stood still, letting the house find its rhythm again, slow and steady, like a bridge relieved of its dead weight, waiting quietly for the new material to set. The sound of tires grinding over gravel tore through the calm of the room, sharp, coarse, and angry. The gate slammed open. Footsteps pounded across the porch. Heavy rushed like a weight dropped onto a wooden beam. Then came the pounding at the door, hard, erratic, unmeasured. Before I reached the handle, it burst open. Derek stood in the doorway. Shirt, wrinkled face, flushed the stink of whiskey and smoke rolling off him. He jabbed a finger toward me, words breaking apart as they left his mouth. "You ruined my life. You took my chance. You played dirty." I didn't move. My eyes went to the desk, my phone beside the court order neatly filed. I pressed a single number and set the phone flat on the table speaker on. The line clicked once, then Julia's voice came through low and steady like tempered steel. "Derek's in the house," I said, "unauthorized, making threats. No hesitation. I see his car on the gate." "Cam," Julia replied. "I've already called it in. Officers are on their way." For a second, Derek froze, realizing there was a third presence in the room, an invisible voice carrying authority. Then he stepped closer, fists tightening, knuckles white. I placed my hand flat on the table, feeling the smooth, cool grain of the wood. "Stop," I told him. "This is private property. Everything is being recorded." I didn't shout. I didn't explain. I said only what would hold up if this moment ever needed to stand before a board of inquiry. He spat a curse, kicked the table leg. The teacup rocked, but didn't spill. Outside, the muffled wail of a patrol car slipped through the trees. Derek flinched and turned. White headlights flashed through the window, followed by the thud of boots on gravel. A knock, firm and rhythmic. I rose and opened the door. 2 officers stood on the porch, hands near their radios, eyes scanning the room. One asked if I was the caller reporting an intruder and personal threat. I nodded and pointed to Derek. He launched into a wild defense, said it was a family matter, that I'd trapped him and his wife, that I'd stolen money that was rightfully hers. His voice cracked and surged, a damaged beam forced to take one load too many. The second officer told him to stand still, hands behind his back. The click of the cuffs echoed like a lock engaging. They read his rights while he protested. I said nothing. Just watched the rainwater drip from their boots, pooling on the tile in tiny silver lines. They led him out. As he passed, I saw what I'd refused to name all these months, not just a man angry at losing, but an addict to the feeling of easy wins, shortcuts, applause. When the patrol car door shut and the engine faded, the house fell back into a clean, almost sterile silence, like a work site after the debris has been cleared. That night, rain gave way to stillness. Julia texted Derek was in custody for trespassing and making threats. Charges could move forward if I confirmed my statement. I replied with one line, "I'll follow procedure." She sent back, "Get some rest. I'll take it from here." Weeks passed. Then the story broke beyond my walls. Black headlines on the local paper that morning spread across the page like cracks surfacing on wet concrete. Harris Development files for bankruptcy protection. Pages of creditors. $500,000 bridge loan unpaid. Fraud investigation underway. I read the entire article, finger tracing each line so the folds wouldn't blur the print. Derek's name sat at the center of the allegations, surrounded by the dry language of failure, misrepresentation to investors. Breach of fiduciary duty. Misuse of company funds for personal expense. The phone stayed silent all day. By evening, Natalie texted, "I lost my job." They said downsizing. A week later, another. The bank sent foreclosure notice. I read every word steady, like measuring the span of a cracked arch, each detail fitting exactly where it should. Every collapse leaves a visible trace. Only those inside keep painting over it until it disappears. A few days later, auction flyers appeared on her neighborhood board, then vanished. Someone must have torn them down. I didn't drive past the house. I could see it clearly enough in my mind, the small yard big enough for 2 cars, the framed seascape from a mall sale, the liquor cabinet filled with unopened labels, a home built on borrowed ground. I began packing my own. The big house in West Austin held too many echoes. Every room had an empty space shaped like Eleanor. I called a broker for appraisal. A young agent came by with a laser measurer and camera, nodding at the walnut kitchen, the western windows overlooking the hills. Her numbers made sense. That afternoon I signed. The for sale sign went up, and not long after a sold placard covered it. I boxed up books, drafting tools, sketches from unfinished projects. Kept a few. Donated the rest to a local charity. 2 movers hoisted the long dining table where we'd once shared dinners. As they tilted it through the door, sunlight flooded the floor, leaving a bright rectangular outline where it had stood. I stood inside that shape for a moment, then stepped out. Galveston greeted me with salt wind and the slow percussion of waves steady as an old metronome. The new apartment overlooked the bay balcony, just wide enough for 2 wooden chairs and a round table. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. No dreams, no 3 a.m. awakenings. Morning light reached across the water. I brewed tea, opened the balcony door, and watched cargo ships slide across the horizon, massive and silent. When I opened my laptop, an email from Julia waited. A legal aid group in Houston needed funding to expand their senior hotline. I wrote back that I'd visit in person and requested their annual report and volunteer list. News of Derek still came, small ripples hitting the same spot. His attorney was negotiating bail. The press covered every turn. No more golf course photos, no infinity pools, just a courthouse hallway. Shot his suit too tight, his jaw unshaven. I never sent those articles to Natalie. I left her a silence wide enough to hear herself. She called one cold evening voice thin as a thread. She and the kids were staying with a friend near Round Rock. She said she was sorry for everything. She'd find work, take the kids to therapy, pay what she owed. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make excuses. Her words had changed materials. I told her I'd send contacts for legal aid and part-time jobs. She thanked me, then paused. Do you think Mom's angry with me? Outside the sea was darkening. The port lights blinked red against the horizon. Your mother isn't angry, I said. She just drew a boundary to keep everything from spilling over and washing away. You touched that boundary. Now you have to learn how to build your own walls. The day I handed over the keys to the old house, I drove down the familiar hill and didn't look back. Before turning onto the main road, I pulled over, scrolled through my phone, and deleted numbers I shouldn't call anymore. Then I set 3 new speed dials contacts for the Foundation's next round of partners. When I placed the phone on the passenger seat, my hand was steady. That night I opened my notebook and wrote a single line at the top of the new month. I didn't seek revenge. I just removed the rotten concrete so the rest wouldn't collapse. I underlined the rest. Then I closed the book, switched off the lamp, and let the sound of the waves lay down a steady rhythm for sleep. A year had passed since I left the old house in Austin. My life had settled into a rhythm, simple, steady, like the pulse of a well-calibrated pump. Mondays meetings with Julia at the small office we rented on the 7th floor in downtown Galveston. Wednesdays site inspections in Houston. Fridays calls to the 3 senior centers to make sure their kitchen grants had cleared. Those quiet, even beats gave my days a frame, and I held on to that frame the way an engineer holds onto a drawing already approved for construction. One April afternoon, as sunlight stretched into long amber streaks across my desk, the phone buzzed. A Houston number I didn't recognize. I answered. Set the phone down so I could hear the breath on the other end. The voice was thin, cautious, like someone testing her weight on a bridge she wasn't sure would hold. Dad, it's Natalie. I'm in Houston. Can I see you? Out on the water. A cargo ship was changing course, dragging a silver wake behind it like a strand of thread. I asked where she was. She said near Methodist Hospital that she could drive down right away. I told her I'd be at the office until 6th, 7th floor, last door down the hall, the one with her mother's foundation name on it. An hour later, a soft knock. She stood in the doorway, thinner hair, tied back neatly, white shirt, worn thin from washing, black slacks, pressed, but faded flats, scuffed at the toes. She stepped inside, glanced around the small room, 2 matching desks, 1 filing cabinet. A framed photo of Eleanor hung opposite the window. She took a long breath like someone catching rhythm again after a steep climb. I work at a cafe near River Oaks, she said. Morning shifts. I make coffee and clean tables. I'm not good yet, but I'm learning. Her hand tightened on the strap of her canvas bag. I want to do something that means more. If you'll let me, I'd like to work for the foundation. I'm not asking for money, just a job. I didn't answer right away. I sat placing both hands on the cool edge of the desk. Julia wasn't here. She was in Harris County Court that afternoon, attending a hearing for an elderly woman whose son had stolen her bank card. The hum of the air conditioner and the muted sound of traffic below blended together like wind through steel trusses. I told Natalie to sit. The work here isn't like anything you've done, I said. There are no black cards to swipe, no glass boardrooms, no private elevators. Just grant applications, cost estimates, and phone calls to check if the shuttle bus for seniors broke down again. Deadlines here aren't photo ops. They're meals and medicine due this week. Do you understand that? She nodded, eyes steady. I do. I'll start from zero, from the smallest task. I opened the drawer and pulled out a file that had arrived that morning from a senior center in Pasadena. They were requesting funds to replace a leaking freezer that was wasting electricity and spoiling food. I slid the folder toward her. Read this. Mark the missing data points, especially power ratings and contractor quotes. Don't rush. Be accurate. She took the file with both hands, the same way Eleanor used to take a blueprint. Then she set her pen against the margin and began to read. While she worked, I checked Julia's email. She'd finalized a safety renovation proposal in Pearland, installing grab bars and non-slip mats in homes for people over 70. I printed the site list, penciled it into the calendar. When I looked back, Natalie was still reading, eyes sharp. Then she looked up. Does the new freezer's power load match the existing circuit? She asked. I nodded. Good catch. Call them, ask for the electrical layout, and a second quote from another vendor. Tell them Friday's the deadline for disbursement. She exhaled, like releasing a bolt under tension. I'll call right now. She opened her phone, typed the number carefully, as I recited it, then dialed. Her voice on the line was polite, composed. I listened how she introduced herself, how she said her mother's foundation name, how she asked for the missing documents. No gloss, no polish, just bare wood. When the call ended, she looked at Eleanor's picture on the wall. She walked toward it, drawn like iron to a magnet, and stopped an arm's length away. Mom, she whispered, barely sound, just breath. I turned to the window, giving her the space to stand there alone. When she came back to her chair, her eyes were quieter. There's a process, I said. Everyone who works here, family or not, files an application and does a 1-week trial. Write your statement 1 page, no more. Jobs you've held in the past 2 years, your biggest mistakes and what you learned from them. No skipping, no varnish. Chronological order. You can use the desk next to mine. The computer's ready. She moved to the other table, straight-backed. For 10 minutes, she didn't type, just stared at the screen like a builder measuring height before cutting a beam. Then the first keystrokes came steady and deliberate. I didn't look over her shoulder. I let her build her own foundation. Meanwhile, I printed 2 contracts, one for interns, one for full employees, and placed them in the file tray. An hour left in the day. When she finally stopped typing, the sky outside had turned the color of honey. She handed me her page and a half, even lines plain language. She wrote about lying to me over the trip, about the hollow feeling when the bank alerts came, about the nights lying awake, afraid the kids would hear the debt collectors calling, about her first morning at the cafe, spilling milk being scolded in front of customers, and the night she scrubbed the floors until her knees were wet. At the end, one sentence: I want to spend the rest of my life moving money to where it truly belongs, because that's the only way to repay what I broke. I folded the page and set it on the desk. Be here early tomorrow, I said. We're doing a site check in Baytown. 12 bathtubs need safety rails installed. Wear soft soles. Bring a notebook. Out there's less writing, more looking. You'll learn to see the hairline cracks in tile, the moisture stains in ceilings, the vibration of weak flooring. Those details decide whether an old woman falls or stands. She nodded. I'll be here. She gathered her folder and slipped it into her bag. At the door, she hesitated a beat. Thank you, Dad, she said, steady voice. There's no gratitude here, I told her. Only work. Do it right, and the rest will take care of itself. The door closed. The room held the scent of freshly printed paper and the quiet hum of the air conditioner. I sat down, signed her probation form, set the alarm clock half an hour earlier for the morning. On the desk beside me, her chair was pulled neatly in the pen, upright in the cup, an empty paper tray, waiting. Evening light pooled across both desks, like warm water. I reached over and turned off the lamp, leaving only the natural glow washing over the twin tables. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, carrying the first trace of night air. A siren passed, fading into the distance. In the silence that followed, I felt the lines of my daughter's life beginning to straighten, no longer bending to avoid the truth. I put on my jacket, gathered my keys, locked the office, and stood for a moment at the end of the dim hallway before pressing the elevator button. As the doors slid shut, I thought of the trip in the morning, 12 rails to be fastened into the walls, and one new pair of hands learning how to tighten a screw to just the right torque. The next morning, I drove north toward Austin under a dry blue sky. Julia had texted late the night before. Short, precise, let her try 3 months unpaid. If she holds, sign her on. I reread it while parked in the garage beneath the building on Congress Avenue, where Julia's law office took the 8th floor. Our foundation leased a small room 1 floor below, close enough for oversight. I turned off the engine and listened to the cooling metal tick a bridge's breath after the last vibration settles. Natalie arrived 10 minutes early. Gray sweater, black slacks, and old canvas tote. She greeted me softly, then stood by the side desk like an apprentice waiting to be handed a steel ruler. I gave her a key to the file cabinet, a list of procedures, and her first assignment: print payment orders for 4 senior centers, cross-check account numbers, verify signatures, stamp record, zip codes. Nothing glamorous, just small bolts that keep the structure from slipping apart. She washed her hands, dried them, sat, and started the printer. The first order slid out paper still warm. I told her to check each line from organization name to project description from amount to release date. She laid a ruler along the margin, tracing slowly with one hand, marking verified points with the other. When she noticed 2 accounts ending in identical digits, she stopped, opened her email, called to confirm, and logged the note in neat handwriting. I watched her from across the room. No guessing, no skipping, no rush. The precision was so like Eleanor's that it tightened something in my throat. Near noon, she brought over the stack, triple-checked. I signed and told her to mail each envelope herself. Here, the last person to touch a document owned the outcome. When she returned, the faint smell of glue and new paper followed her back into the room. I handed her another task call, the Baytown Handrail Project, confirm the crew had taken measurements, remind them to send before and after photos for records. By 3, her eyes were red from strain. I pushed a water bottle and a granola bar toward her, told her to take 5 in the break room. She nodded left and came back exactly 5 minutes later. The afternoon sun fractured across the window glass, thick gold pooling along the desk edges. When we wrapped up, she said she had a night shift at the cafe on South Lamar. Asked if she could leave 10 minutes early for the bus. I nodded. Tomorrow at 8 sharp, we have a group call with 3 center directors. She bowed her head slightly. Yes, sir. Then hurried toward the elevator, her silhouette closing in the gap of the doors, thin straight like a drawn steel wire. Days settled into a rhythm. Each morning she arrived at 8, brewed coffee for the office, cleaned the printer, replaced paper, checked ink. She built a spreadsheet tracking every transfer, adding red flags for any delay beyond 3 days. At noon, she ate her packed lunch. By afternoon, she was on the phone with project leads, kitchen managers, transport coordinators, people who needed patience more than procedure. She listened, asked questions, closed each call with the same line. I've noted it. I'll send the update form this afternoon. She worked nights, too. I knew because one evening we crossed paths outside the building. I carried a briefcase of reports. She carried a trash bag full of broken cups, the smell of coffee and burnt sugar on her sleeves. I asked how much she slept. 4 hours, maybe, she said. But I always spend 10 minutes reviewing the fund procedures before bed. I'm afraid of missing a digit. A week and a half and Julia visited. She opened the ledger, pulled a random payment order, and tracked it from entry to delivery receipt. Natalie stood beside her, answering every question calmly. When Julia asked why she'd reversed 2 steps in the process, Natalie said, Center A needed the funds early to lock in a freezer, quote, expiring tomorrow. Center B hasn't sent the original invoice, so I prioritized A. Julia looked at me. Her expression softened half a degree. Good, she said. Keep that judgment. But remember 3 bids for anything over the threshold. Natalie wrote it down and underlined it twice. By the second weekend, a man in his mid-40s appeared at our door. He knocked softly, introduced himself as Mason Cole. I remembered him once, an intern under Eleanor at a structural consulting firm, now a financial advisor for another fund in Dallas, helping us build a safe investment model. He shook my hand, his smile carrying the quiet ache of someone touching an old beam still standing. Mason looked around, then turned to Natalie. He told her how years ago he'd miscalculated a load table, and Eleanor made him redo it from line 1 late into the night, watching aggregates fall into the mixer until he understood weight and consequence. Your mother taught me something, he said. Every bridge rests on honesty. Mix dishonesty into the concrete, and it'll crack sooner or later. Now you have to pour your own concrete with your own hands. His words weren't loud. but they landed where they needed to. Natalie sat straight, hands folded. No excuses, no gloss. She nodded once, voice low but steady. "I'm ready." Mason gave a thin smile, then turned to business questions about liquidity ratios, reserve percentages, cash flow schedules. We reviewed the chart. Natalie took notes, occasionally repeating a number to confirm she'd heard right. Before leaving, Mason promised to send a simplified cash flow model she could update daily. The first month passed in small, deliberate motions. She never missed a mailing deadline, never skipped a follow-up call. She still made mistakes, typed a wrong figure once in a report, but caught it before submission, drafted her own correction memo, signed it, and filed it on my desk. I signed and added a single note: "Prevent, don't punish." By the second month, I sent her out on solo site visits. The first was a small center in Gainesville with a failing elevator. I told her to photograph the serial plate, confirm the safety permit check for misaligned doors. She came back with clear pictures, direct answers, and a cost-saving proposal replaced the rubber seals instead of the whole door unit. I reviewed it, called Mason. He said it was sound, just add a re-inspection after 1 quarter. By the third month, her body adjusted to the 2-job rhythm. She still worked nights, but synced her days off with field trips. Her face looked less drawn, her eyes sharper. Julia assigned her a full region South Austin centers to manage end to end. It was a test. Natalie took it without complaint or bargaining. She called, verified, scheduled, cross-checked. Every evening I checked her progress sheet. The boxes turned green one by one. One rainy afternoon, we stood under the awning watching Congress Avenue gloss over with water. The bats beneath the bridge hadn't come out yet, but the river's damp breath rose in waves. She asked quietly, "At the end of 3 months, if I pass, what do I get?" I said, "You'll get a contract, a modest salary, little time off, and a stack of work bigger than today's." She smiled, small, knowing. Maybe because she understood the truth. What she'd earn was exactly what she wanted to stay, and to do it right. At the end of week 12, Julia called for a review. We met in the 8th floor conference room, a wall map dotted with pins for every county served. Julia asked Natalie to self-assess. She said she needed to learn more about audit reports and vendor negotiation. Julia noted it for training. I looked down at the notebook where I'd listed her goals 3 months ago, then at the check marks beside most of them. Not complete, but clear. That evening, I went back to our 7th floor office. Her desk was tidy, tomorrow's payment list clipped on top. In the corner, a handwritten note: "Don't let anyone fall just because we're 1 day late." I rested my hand on the desk's edge and listened to the rain against the glass. Tomorrow, I'd answer the question she hadn't voiced. The elevator doors opened, bringing in the smell of wet coats and city dusk. I stepped inside, letting the cable hum carry me down, thinking of the contract folded in my briefcase, and the signature that would come not early, not late, exactly when the structure was ready to bear its own weight. Monday morning began with a thick envelope lying in the middle of my paperwork stack. Julia placed it on my desk. As she came in, her breath carrying the faint smell of coffee. "Silver Oaks Senior Center in Dallas," she said. "They're applying for a $100,000 grant to rebuild their bathrooms and hallways with safety rails. Your daughter should take this one." I nodded. Silver Oaks was a big project, but also the perfect test at the perfect time. I called Natalie up to the office. She came in still holding her notebook from the morning meeting. I slid the envelope toward her and told her to read every line, check each figure, especially the materials listed for anti-slip flooring and labor costs. She opened the packet papers, rustling under her fingers, eyes narrowing with the kind of focus that belonged to someone reading a structural blueprint. "Call their site manager," I added. Confirm the subcontractor and find out whether the bathrooms are in the old wing or the new one. If it's the old, we'll need to test the foundation before they start renovation. On paper, you can fix anything. Once you pour concrete, there's no going back." She wrote every word down. For 2 days, she barely left her desk. Calls stacked on calls, emails, back and forth details tightening like bolts on a girder. I listened as she asked questions only someone who understood structure would ask: slope, gradient rail spacing, slip resistance certification. By evening, when I was packing to leave, she was still there, hair loose, eyes locked on an open spreadsheet. I told her to stop for the night. She smiled faintly. "Just want to finish this price comparison before I forget." I left her there, bathed in the thin amber glow of a desk lamp, stretched taut like a cable between 2 towers. 3 days later, the completed assessment lay on my desk. Clear, balanced, detailed 2 contingency options for the foundation. I read it line by line. When I closed the file, I nodded. "This structure holds," I said. "You understand the value of every dollar now." For the first time in months, she smiled, not the practiced kind, but a real one, weary and honest. The smile of someone who'd just built her first bridge with her own hands. That afternoon, we met with Julia to finalize the approval. She flipped through, noted a few figures on the escrow page, then signed the authorization form. I signed next and handed it to Natalie. "Execute the transfer," I said. "Attach all supporting documents and submit through the internal bank portal." She sat down, logged in, typing each field slowly, her breathing even, like counting the beats of a span under load. At the final confirmation screen, her hand paused for half a second, then pressed send. 30 minutes later, Julia's alert pinged. The system had held the transaction missing attachment. I looked over. Natalie froze, then quickly opened the file again. Her hands trembled slightly. The scanned authorization had been saved to the wrong folder. Julia frowned, not with anger, but with the reflex of someone who'd just spotted a hairline crack on an otherwise perfect beam. Natalie tried to speak, but her voice caught. I placed my hand on the desk. "Slow down," I said. "Reload the file. Check everything, then send again. A small flaw's better than a full collapse." I turned to Julia. "Every bridge gets tested before opening. If a girder can't handle one tremor, it'll break mid-span." Julia exhaled, nodded, and looked at Natalie. "It's fine," she said gently. "The transfer's just on hold, not late." Natalie nodded, shoulders dropping like a weight being lowered to the ground. She went through the steps again, careful this time, double-checking each field, uploading the document, printing the receipt. When the confirmation finally appeared, I heard her let out a long, shaky breath. Her eyes were wet when she turned to me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No one builds their first bridge without dropping a brick," I said. "What matters is that you picked it up and set it straight." She bowed her head. Her hands clenched together, lips moving soundlessly. Then the quiet sound of tears hitting the desk. Small, soft, precise. I didn't speak. There was no need for comfort. Those drops were the final load test of a structure long under stress. I simply handed her a tissue. She wiped her face and tried to smile, uneven but sincere. What I saw wasn't weakness. It was truth. Forgiveness isn't erasing the crack, it's letting a broken frame be welded back with stronger steel. That night, Julia left first. I stayed with Natalie to send the confirmation to Dallas. The window was open. The air smelled of rain about to fall. She checked the inbox. Silver Oaks had replied. They thanked us, said the funds had arrived just in time, that the contractor was signed and work would begin next week. Natalie finished reading and smiled again, softer, now balanced. She said something I didn't expect. "Thank you, Dad, for letting me do this." Who are you thanking? I asked. The manager or the supervisor? She shook her head. No, I'm thanking the man who let me start over. Outside, the streetlights flicked on. Rain tapped the glass, sliding down in slanted streaks. I thought of Eleanor, her late nights sketching bridges, her belief that every structure needs one weakest moment to prove it can stand. Natalie had just found hers. I turned off the lamp, leaving the window's light to fill the room. Two silhouettes, one old, one young, both listening to the rhythm of the rain. Somewhere in that sound, a new bridge was taking shape. Not of steel, but of trust tested, strained, and still standing. 3 weeks later, we drove to Dallas to visit the Silver Oaks site. The road stretched between two lines of oak trees, their deep green canopies tilting in the wind, sunlight flickering across the asphalt, like the pulse of someone learning to breathe steady again. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, project folder clasped in her lap. Reading the inspection checklist aloud, anti-slip walkways, restroom upgrades, kitchen flooring, and the new handrails along the east corridor. I let her talk, only nodding when needed. She no longer waited for direction. She knew how to prepare now. By the time we arrived, the sun was high. Silver Oaks stood quietly in a residential district walls, painted a soft cream roofs the color of old brick lavender blooming in the garden out front. Michelle, the center's director, greeted us with a tired but kind smile. She led us through the renovated wing, the floors dry and clean, the rails gleaming, the air thick with the scent of paint and soap. It was the smell of finished work, of things made right. Natalie moved slowly, taking photos, noting details, asking about maintenance costs and inspection schedules. As we passed the common area, an elderly voice called her name. A frail woman in a wheelchair sat by the window, hair white as salt, eyes bright with something that hadn't dimmed. Michelle introduced her Ruth Parker, 76, a longtime resident. Natalie bent down to greet her. Ruth's thin hands closed around hers. You're Mr. Beckett's daughter, aren't you? The old woman asked, her voice raspy but clear. Natalie hesitated, then nodded. Ruth squeezed tighter, her eyes glistening. Your father saved me, she said. He understood the value of fairness. I stood a few steps away, hearing every word. Ruth told us how the year before she'd lost her entire retirement to a fake investment scam run by men posing as bankers. Our foundation had covered her rent and provided legal help until she recovered some compensation. Natalie listened in silence, her lips pressed together. When Ruth finished, she said nothing, just held her hand. But her eyes changed. Something old and heavy shifted inside them, something that looked like understanding. On the drive back, the wind picked up clouds gathering in the west. I drove. Natalie stared out the window, quiet. After a long while, she said softly, Dad, she still doesn't have a permanent place to live. She's renting a temporary room. I grunted, keeping my eyes on the road. What do you plan to do? She didn't answer at first. Then, after a pause, I want to take $5,000 from the emergency fund to help her with rent for the next 3 months, until the compensation clears. I didn't speak, just glanced over. Her face was calm, but her voice trembled slightly, the sound of someone arriving at a decision that cost something real. I waited until we reached the parking lot beneath the overpass. I turned off the engine. The world went still. Are you doing this out of guilt? I asked, or out of justice? She turned to face me. Light from the windshield caught in her eyes, clear, unwavering. Both, she said. But this time, I'm not using money to hide. I'm using it to fix what's broken. I felt my throat tighten. A simple answer, but it carried more weight than any apology could. Eleanor once told me true atonement isn't spoken, it's doing right what you once did wrong. When we got back to the office, Natalie logged into the system, entered the emergency disbursement, attached Ruth's case documentation. Minutes later, Julia called. The system flagged a new entry, she said. Was that approved? Approved, I replied. Verbally. There was a soft laugh on the line. I'll draft the paperwork to make it official, Julia said. When I hung up, Natalie was standing by the window looking out at the city lights flickering on. The rain had stopped. The pavement shimmered under the amber glow of street lamps. Without turning, she said, "You know, Dad, Eleanor used to visit Silver Oaks. She told me once it wasn't just a facility, it was a structure worth keeping strong. Not with steel, but with people." I moved beside her, looking down at the traffic flowing beneath. For a moment, I saw Eleanor again, pencil in hand, sketching beams and trusses, saying every structure carries its own load, and if you want it to stand, you have to place the weight exactly where it belongs. I realized my daughter had just done that, placed the weight of her guilt right on the point that could bear it. No praise was needed, no reward, only the silence of two people looking in the same direction. That night at home, I opened the drawer and took out Eleanor's old notebook. Between 2 pages in her blue ink, she had written, "There's no perfect structure, only people who keep repairing." I closed the book, gently set it on the desk, and looked at her photo, smiling back. "Eleanor," I said quietly, "I think you won." And this time I believed it. The next morning when Natalie came in, I asked, "Did Mrs. Parker find a place yet?" She smiled. "Yes, a small apartment in Garland near the church." I nodded. "Good. Make sure we follow up." She returned to her desk and began her work like any other day. No thank yous, no hugs, just that quiet understanding between two people who had crossed a bridge and found it still standing. I opened the window. The wind off the river carried the smell of last night's rain, and in the rhythm of the street below, I heard it a sound like metal being welded back together after a break. Not loud, just certain. A new structure had taken shape, and this time, it wasn't going to fall. The morning of the recognition ceremony at Austin City Hall, I stood behind the curtain watching the crowd through a thin slit in the stage drape. On stage hung a white banner printed with the words, "The Eleanor Beckett Foundation." Every seat in the hall was filled. The light was soft gold, the kind of hue that settles over a bridge when the final coat of paint dries. I tightened my grip on the folded speech in my hand, feeling my heartbeat steady and rhythmic like the sound of a hammer striking steel in an old workshop. Julia caught my eye from the wings and gave a small nod. My cue. I stepped forward. The stage floor creaked once under my shoe, then went still quiet as a river before a stress test. I looked out across the room, directors from senior centers, a few reporters, a row of engineering students from the University of Texas, and in the far left corner, Natalie. Her hair was cut short now, her gray suit, simple hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes calm like water after a storm. There was nothing left of the girl in the Dubai photos, only a woman listening with intent. I gave her a brief nod, then turned toward the microphone. I spoke slowly. I told them that Eleanor once taught me something simple. Every bridge needs 2 pillars, truth and responsibility. If one fails, the entire span collapses. The room went silent. I said my life had been made of numbers and blueprints, of placing beams exactly where they belong, of cutting out cracked concrete before it brings the whole structure down. That our foundation spends money the way craftsmen use their tools, no decoration, no gloss. We spend it to install better rails, safer floors, clearer exit signs, and to pay fair wages to the hands that keep community kitchens running. Every dollar has its load point, and we spent the last year finding each one. I paused, scanning the faces. I mentioned Silver Oaks in Dallas, where the new rails let a woman named Ruth walk the hallway without a single fall since last month. I spoke of the hot meal deliveries in Waco, the financial fraud workshops for seniors in Travis County. That was how Eleanor worked quietly, consistently, even after she was gone. She didn't leave me a statue. She left a blueprint, and I built from it. When I finished, there was one long beat of silence, then applause rolled through the hall like a tide reaching shore. I bowed, accepted the plaque from a city commissioner, and thanked them in a few words. Under the softer lights, the faces before me looked human again, unguarded. I stepped off the stage through rows of dark jackets, the sound of shoes tapping on wood, and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the hallway refreshment table. It reminded me of mornings at the office, Natalie setting a cup beside my hand without saying a word. She was waiting near the exit, not anxious, not proud, just steady. When I reached her, she smiled the careful smile of someone who has learned that restraint carries more weight than enthusiasm. "Your speech was short enough to remember," she said, "and slow enough to understand." I smiled back. I only spoke the language of my trade. Bridges always speak through their silence. She looked down at her shoes, inhaled, and said she wasn't ready to call this forgiveness. But she knew I'd given her the chance to rebuild. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyelids fluttered slightly like someone who had just cleared a narrow turn without scraping the guardrail. I placed a hand on her shoulder, a reflex like guiding a beam back into alignment. "I don't need to build bridges anymore," I said. "You've learned how to do it yourself. Not with money, with time, with honesty, with triple-checked paperwork and signatures written only after reading the fine print." She exhaled softly and handed me an envelope, the Foundation's quarterly report. Clean numbers, crisp, annotations, a few handwritten notes from newly funded centers. I tucked it into my briefcase. This afternoon, I said, let's review the contingency budget. See if we can push more funds to the elder care transport program in San Marcos before the rains start. She nodded, already calculating. The reception afterward filled the lobby with warm light. The marble floor gleamed like an old train station full of motion, but no haste. People shook hands, exchanged cards, repeated lines from the speech. I stood by the long table of fruit and crackers, listening to a pastor tell how one of his parishioners had rejoined the community after attending our financial counseling sessions. Across the room, Natalie was speaking with a small group of students, and Mason Cole, the financial advisor, who once told her that honesty was the only real foundation. I watched her explain how she compared bids for a hospital elevator upgrade, why 3 contractors could vary 10% on the same line item, and why the lowest number isn't always the right one. She spoke slowly, clearly, tracing invisible diagrams in the air with her hands, just like Eleanor used to do. I stayed back, just watching. When the guests thinned out, she and I stepped onto the stone steps outside City Hall. The evening air was clean, the tower's shadow stretching long across the square. I told her that justice, when it works, is like force applied exactly at the weak point. It doesn't need to be heavy, only precise. She said she'd learned that the day she signed the emergency fund for Ruth and then rushed to Garland to check the lock on her new apartment. She spoke about Derek, about the court settlement notice, about quitting her second job to work full-time at the foundation, and how she walked the lake loop each night to quiet her mind before sleep. I listened. Between us was a silence filled not with absence, but with what had been repaired. On the drive home, I thought about the numbers that once haunted me a lie, worth 20,000 alone of 500,000, the price of greed mixed with pride and ignorance. I no longer denied the weight of money, but I understood something new. Losing it isn't the worst thing. For us, it was the cost of buying back integrity. Eleanor left me wealth. I returned it to the world as justice. And to my daughter, I returned the right to begin again. That night, the Galveston apartment was quiet as usual. I set the plaque on the bookshelf beside Eleanor's smiling photo. Her eyes seemed to look right through the glass, telling me the bridge had been built in the right direction. A message buzzed from Natalie. She'd arrived safely in Austin, reminded me to review the Bastrop anti-fraud project files in the morning. I texted back one word, done, then shut off the screen, filled the kettle, and let the soft boil fade into a steady hum. Outside, the sea was a dark pane of glass, the waves rolling evenly like the breath of someone finally asleep. I sat at the table, opened Eleanor's old notebook, and wrote a single line. Today, the bridge stands firm. I closed it, leaned back, and shut my eyes for a moment. In my mind, the clang of welded steel had gone quiet, replaced by the certain grounded silence of a structure that had passed its test. The heaviness in my chest eased. Like a worker at the end of his shift, I washed my hands, dried them, hung the apron on its hook, and nodded once to the workshop before leaving. Thank you for listening. If you've ever had your child betray your trust for money, what would you do? Share your thoughts, and follow for more stories about justice and forgiveness. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, share, and subscribe so we can keep building stories that matter. Thank you.